I'm Steve Gilman, and this is Brand Story, where we help you build stronger, more sustainable brands by sharing insightful conversations with brand leaders, marketers, and professional storytellers. And my guest today is Mark Lester.
If COVID was an accelerator of anything, it was an unhappiness crisis that actually stretches about 30 to 40 years. And it reached a peak, which it hasn't really decreased from. I think that has become, to us, the single most important economic trend that we're experiencing right now. To be clear, what we're not saying is stick a smiley logo on every can of food, or we're just saying you should understand more about what's making people unhappy and what's making them happy.
Mark is the co-founder of Squint, a brand consultancy behind major growth stories for Ollipop, Netflix, Nike, and more. And before that, he spent about 15 years at agencies like RG&A and Dentsu. And Mark has been helping brands compete with something rare and really powerful, happiness. And today we're going to talk about building brands that don't just perform, but actually feel good to be around, which is fascinating. I can't wait to talk to you, Mark. Welcome to Brand Story.
Thanks so much for having me, Steve. It's an absolute pleasure to be on here. And it's great hearing you describe what we're up to so well, you know?
Yeah, you guys have such a cool thing going, and you have such a unique point of view in the industry that I've been looking forward to this one for a while. So let me just kind of set the stage a little bit with your journey, because I think it's different than most. So what inspired you to launch Squint? By the way, we'll get to the name in a minute because I love the name of your agency.
Yes. Well, so I'd been in different forms of ad agency and in the agency business for my whole career. And as I think is well publicized, things have got pretty rough out there, you know?
Yeah, it's crazy out there.
We were describing, this was even 8 years ago. I remember being at RGA in New York, and we were going through what they described as the adpocalypse, you know? It was, and so I was going through all that, and I was just, I've been around long enough that I was around for sort of some of the heyday when really great brand strategy was being done at agencies, like very upstream. We were in the boardroom. We were helping make large strategic decisions for big commercial organizations. And over time, you just saw that dissipate. And brand strategy more and more became creative strategy. You know, it was more downstream. It was still interesting, but it was less influential. And so I've been sort of for a while figuring how do I get back to the things that I'm most interested in, which is, you know, upstream brand transformation and its heart, brand strategy. And at that stage, you just started to see the beginnings of that sort of movement, which I think a lot of folks have moved into, of a sort of independent space, you know, emerging. So I'd sort of been talking to a few folks, you know, you go through that period where you start, you know, meeting people you've liked work, being like, could we launch a thing together? Would we launch a thing together? And a few things sort of almost happened, but actually we didn't, you know, get to vision alignment. There was one I walked away from. Oh, so we sort of both walked away from, you know, really, because we were like, we're still very good friends, and we're like, we're just not got the same vision for what we're trying to do. And then I just got 2 phone calls out of the blue. One was from Netflix, which was from somebody I used to manage, but was like, I've got some work I need help with. Like, I know you're thinking about launching, would you help? And the other was Ollipop, which became this crazy journey that has sort of defined our company. And so actually at that time, when I got those phone calls, I was on holiday in Orlando with my wife and her family. And my wife has a background in entrepreneurship. She's run her own businesses like her whole career. And we were in a swimming pool, and I just turned to her and said, do you think you could help me out with this a bit if I did it on my own? And then 2 weeks later, we realized it wasn't just for a little bit. And so we moved from husband and wife to launching and running a business together. And that was, you know, 4 or 5 years ago, and we just haven't really looked backwards. So it's, you know, it's a funny thing of partially putting it out into the world, a few market forces, and then a bit of luck.
Yeah, that's kind of how all great things come together, you know? A little bit of luck and some market forces and people that you have relationships with. So how's it going working with your wife? I know you just had a new baby. That's you guys have everything going on.
We've had a lot going on. Yeah, we don't. Life's not boring. I'll put it that way. Life is not boring. Yeah.
No, I bet. That's great though. What a rich, cool relationship.
Yeah, and it's been so honestly, I would say it's been great working with my wife. Like it's really that's been one of the best things about it. And I think um, if you'd asked us at the beginning of marriage, would you work together? We would have been like, no way, like no, there's no chance on earth. But then got into it, and I think the thing that convinced me it'd be a good idea was I read something about what makes for successful working marriages or families. And the thing that they talk about is the separation of responsibilities. Classic thing would be you run a shop together, one of you's, in the back to the counter, one you're serving customers, right? And we're saying we just have it's someone who has experience in how to run a business and somebody that's experience in marketing and brand strategy. And so they're very different roles, but then what we share is a work ethic, and then there's just a lot of trust, particularly when you're in those first couple of years, of a business. You need someone you can trust and rely on. And when you're in it together like that, it's very powerful.
I'm sure that just brought a ton of like genuinely good empathic energy to your clients because, you guys aren't going to be at cross purposes because you're doing this thing together.
Well, I remember, in the early stages when we were working with Ollipop, I remember one of the things they said to us was we could tell it meant everything to you, to both of you, like that this was that you'd gone. It's that classic thing, you've burnt the boats, right? You don't have, there's not one of you that with a salary, we've gone all in, the family's gone all in on this. And I think it just comes across, they've gone all in on this.
I love the pivot because having been in big agencies and going through the adpocalypse, and I have lots of friends that have gone through it too, that, you really pivoted to a much more human thing.
I've talked to you, there was ways in which I was enjoying the work less because we got so downstream, And so part of my thing was, how do we get back where we belong up, doing proper bits of brand transformation and brand exercise, the stuff that we're actually good at. But also, like the relationships had just got so bad, like they were not good relationships. The way I described agency relationships at that stage was arranged marriages, because the retainer model was such, right, that like you came in and maybe you'd be ahead of it, like, I was a head of strategy, right? So it'd be like head of a department, so relatively senior, but still you're working with that, you're working with a brand director. Neither of you made the choice. Somebody appointed the contract 3 years ago and you just stepped into it. And there wasn't a great sense of sort of agency of, we've chosen to work together. There's intent in the relationship, and it was so one of the big things that we've done with our company is we don't do any form of retainer relationship. Everything is a defined like 5 to 12 week contract based off a specific remit. So our clients are always either choosing to work with us or not, but fortunately, generally choosing. But it means everything that you're coming into with intent and saying, we've chosen to work on it to get to this outcome together. And that actually makes it more, to your point, Steve, more human, because then you're just like, we've all signed up to this. We all know that we want to get this done. And the people that signed up to it are in the room,
And that it's important and that you have buy-in and that you have the actual decision makers in the room.
Exactly. Yeah. And I know it's a big part of why the independent movement's become so successful. But yeah, that was to me, that was what was so inhuman, in a professional context, relationships are contracts, aren't they? It's all about the contract you've signed, or you're signing. That sets, and it either gives a space for you to be human and get things done, or it doesn't. And some of those ways of working they just weren't fertile ground. You're always dealing with humans. Just sometimes it's, that's hidden.
I like looking at it as arranged marriages because it really was like that. So you've written about the unhappiness crisis, and Squint has a point of view on happiness and the brands you work with and the way you work that into the work. I'd really love for you to unpack some of that because I find that fascinating.
Yeah. So our sort of unique distinguisher as an agency is we try and build brands with what we call a happiness advantage. So we're sort of looking for the things that, it's most simple, light people up, that create brands, products, and services that people really enjoy and make them happy in a durable way. And obviously that's not a new thing in some ways, but we think it has renewed importance, renewed focus.
It is the core, isn't it?
Yes. And I think the reason it's so important today is because people are so unhappy. And now there's always a sense like, are we just talking about happiness? But the data is pretty clear. Like, if COVID was an accelerator of anything, it was an unhappiness crisis that actually stretches about 30 to 40 years. And it reached a peak, which it hasn't really decreased from. Yeah, we're at the sort of top. And we all kind of feel this, right? There's plenty of things you talk about. Everyone's talking about burnout or stress, or we're talking about some of the sort of flare-ups that you see, but underlying it all is an unhappiness crisis. People aren't, just net aren't very happy, and I think it's complicated what's happening and why it's happening. But what's definitely true is it's happening, and I think that has become to us the single most important economic trend that we're experiencing right now, which is people are more actively trying to spend their money on things that they more explicitly think will uplift them or raise their happiness. And understanding that, and to be clear, what we're not saying is stick a smiley logo on every can of food, or we're just saying you should understand more about what's making people unhappy and what's making them happy, and try and really get that message across to them in some way, to say, like, buying our product can in some way uplift you, decrease those stresses or unhappiness drivers, and ultimately get you to happier life. And if you take that mission quite seriously, today it can lead to it's the most surefire way to extremely large economic results.
Super powerful. It's amazing to me. And I think the industry just became this way. It's kind of what you talked about. It became about execution and tactics and making cool things. And the soul, the heart, just got left by the side of the road sometimes. And people buy everything emotionally. They make every decision emotionally. So while what you're saying, and I've seen you talk about it, it isn't new. It is incredibly important. I feel like so many people have forgotten it. So I think that's why you guys are doing so well.
I know, because if you ask me what's the greatest happiness brand of all time, I'd be like McDonald's. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, right. It makes people feel good.
Yeah, and now obviously their proposition's more under threat because of the health revolution. That's had its impact on whether they can meaningfully claim to be a happiness brand. But if you looked at their journey, like, is the Happy Meal the greatest product in, line extension of all time? Arguably, figuring out how to do children's parties and create characters, and when you look like it with some of the modern food brands, has Chipotle or are some of the modern health competitors, are they as sophisticated in doing some of the same things yet? I don't know. And I think we've become more focused on rational factors. And, I'm sure you've had the same experience, Steve, but how many times have you gone through strategic processes where you're very focused on something like quality or premiumness or trendiness? And how often have you tested explicitly for happiness? Almost never, right? Almost never. And that's our fundamental argument, is why? There's very good evidence it's the biggest purchase intent multiplier out there, much bigger than any of the other things that are listed. There's plenty of good research demonstrating this. So why don't we focus on it more? And some of the biggest commercial successes in the world, and some of the biggest high growth brands today, are the ones that have clearly mastered factors around happiness, which is a mix of functional and emotional factors, that get, but often we're not looking at things comprehensively enough.
Let's kind of take that conversation and talk about your work with Ollipop, because Ollipop is a brand that in the last 6 years has just absolutely exploded. And it's one of my personal favorite brands, because it is sort of a happiness brand. It's like you're getting a treat without the worry that you're eating, 45 grams of sugar or whatever's in Pepsi, so it's a fun relief. It is a moment that you get to have that reminds you of childhood or that speaks to you emotionally, and it feels good. So the amount of access you must have had, the amount of emotional buy-in from the people who run this company to do some of the things you did, can you just kind of unpack this? Because this story is amazing to me.
Well, yeah, again, amazing brand, amazing founders, and very fortunate to have had the opportunity to work with them. So we've been working quite intensely with them over the last 3 to 4 years. And so when we sort of got introduced to the group, they were already a $50 million brand that was selling very successfully in likes of Whole Foods, and other health channels. It wasn't a soda at that point; it was a sparkling tonic. Um, and it was, and I think that, that had been floating round, but the label on the can was sparkling tonic, and it was very much a gut health brand. And the types of things that they were up to, they were doing, they did a lot of yoga activation, and it was a health message, and it resonated exceptionally well with that hardcore, Whole Foods, you draw the person out in LA that, is at Erewhon and Whole Foods, it was doing really well with them. But they sort of, what was so great about the founders, and the, they always had this very big ambition for the brand, and they always really thought, we want to be selling, in mainstream grocery. We want to be a really big brand, and we want to take this health proposition through to folks. And actually, a part of what they said is we just want to find the best way to explain it to people. Like, we're not trying to, we don't want to educate people necessarily. We just want to make it easy for them, and so the relationship started with, we did their sort of like first real deep dive of consumer research and all that they've done. And we sort of entertained a few different propositions for the brand. But what we really found was exactly, you said everything important about the brand in the 10 seconds you introduced it, which is, one, people thought it was a soda because it had soda flavors. And we're like, soda in America is something so powerful. It's like coffee in Europe. It runs deep. It reminds people of their childhoods. People would talk about this. It's sort of emotional security blanket that it would brought around them. It brought them back to childhood. Like, they'd tell you stories of drinking root beer on grandma's lawn, after mowing the grass. And it's, really powerful stuff. And for a new brand that was 2, 3 years old, you're getting credit for memories that, stretch back 50 years often. And we're like, this is emotion. This is emotional dynamite. And in those groups, and the sort of we have a process called Vision Labs that we kind of went through. We really got consumers to articulate very clear vision of what they want. And part of what they were saying was, I don't want this to be called a health drink. Please don't. They I want, and they didn't use this word, but they were like, I want a happiness drink. And what they were talking about was things like, I love the cereal commercials from the 80s with the cartoon characters, and I want to buy into that. Like, I don't want a healthier choice to suck the joy out of soda for me. Like, I want that full fat joy, but a healthier thing. So really, the brand building was all about walking this tightrope between sort of full fat joy, and then underneath it, just the right amount of health messaging. But really, it was, the big shift was, we're not building a health brand, we're building a happiness brand. And how do you go and do that? And we took a lot from the soda marketing playbook, which is well developed. But first thing was, change the can, sparkling tonic, to a new kind of soda, which everyone sort of said, like, this is what sort of resonates. You just give me a little hint that it's better, but it doesn't have the word healthy in it. We reorganized the sort of health proposition, so it was less focused on gut health and on something slightly broader. So things like sugar and stuff were in there, which increased sort of its appeal. But also, we sort of shifted the prop to something on wholesome comfort, which, is a mix of functional and emotional factors. And then we worked with them very intensely over a 3-year period to get them to, they were just valued at sort of 1.85 billion, I think, and it was, we did partnerships with the Minions. We did a big campaign around love and families with Camila Cabello, which sort of went and got her real family into the house. And, just a lot of this stuff. And we were sort of talking about, what would Coca-Cola in the 70s do? That was like the conversation in the room. Like, what would, when they did, like, Hilltop, like, what was it? What was the mindset they were in? And we sort of felt like maybe they can't pull that stuff off these days, but we can. We can get that wholesome comfort really through.
Yeah, I love how you guys took, all the health parts of it for a lot of people are a should, and you made it a want. You just changed the conversation enough that if you're trying to be healthy or you're interested in your kids not having as much sugar, it's there, it's part of it. But the other part is all this nostalgia and even the designs, the flavors.
The flavor, yeah, the flavors are critically important. Like the way that they've line extended over because there was sort of flavors in there as well that were a bit more sort of health focused. Also, the type of things that like a tonic might do. But then one of the things which I realized again was the power of that, of a root beer, of a cherry cola, and like, I mean, it's so regional in the States as well, isn't it? You know what I mean? Like, it's just you're literally talking like different demographics, different like region. There's like local pride in some of them. Like, I think soda's just such a powerful thing.
Anytime I end up having an argument with someone that is usually in leadership about the power of logic versus emotion, I'll just point to the Ollipop brand because all of that, it's just emotion. It's just how people feel and what they remember. And
Yeah, the fundamental liquid is an incredibly winning proposition. But it was about holding the brand true to that and saying, like, the marketing actually, it needs to be as fun as it is to drink, And I think it's a simple strategy. But honestly, at the time, I mean, you can imagine a lot of people felt very strongly, not in the founder group, but just around, that it should be marketed like a health product, and that we were crazy to try and market it. Like, we had, through some of the partnerships that we did, I remember a Hollywood agent calling us, saying that we're going to refuse to run one of the campaigns that we had in the tank because this was crazy. Like, this isn't the way this thing should be marketed. It's a health product, for Christ's sakes, like, and it, like, there was all types of pushback, but really, I think that is fundamental to the success. It's just understanding it's a happiness brand. It's a joyful moment. You can't deny people that,
I love that, man. And I'm so happy to talk to you about it because, believe it or not, I've always been like health conscious. So I would buy Ollipop back when it was just in the health food store. And now I see it everywhere in my, regular grocery stores. And I've got it in my fridge and I love it. So this is just so cool to unpack this with you. Let's talk about another brand that you work with, Netflix, and something I think you're doing with them now where you're working on women's sports.
Oh, so then, yeah, Nike and women's sports.
Oh, is it Nike and women's sports? Sorry, I thought it was Netflix.
Yeah. So so we just did a big project. So we're very fortunate. So we're headquartered out of Amsterdam. Obviously, a big presence for Nike there, and we've been very fortunate to work with them a lot over the last 2 or 3 years. And so we've done some really cool stuff with them in kids, and then actually we've been working with the women's sports team quite a bit recently. And so there's a whole series of areas that Nike's, obviously they've been through an interesting journey as a company the last kind of couple of years, like some ups and downs and some changes. I tell you one thing though, I wouldn't bet against Nike. There's really like, they're still a really impressive org. And I think they made some, I think it's well publicized that they probably made some mistakes in terms of an overvaluation of the DTC, space, and that weakened some of their retailer relationships, and they've had to kind of double down. But the great thing about Nike is, people love it, including the employees. And so there's so much identity for them to come back to. And some of the big thing is for them to come back to the clear category offense of saying, we know, like, let's make sure we're the experts and leaders in these individual sports. Like, let's be the expert in running, let's be the expert in football. And so and they always just want to show leadership in this space. And so obviously, if you're in the football space, like, they're in this clear mindset, are we showing leadership with her and the growth of women's football? So they commissioned us actually to really come in and sort of take a look at, like, actually what the true value of the current female consumer within football is. And we actually went into we put a big focus actually on it was UK and Germany, just because they're the biggest two of the biggest fan cultures, and so they wanted to use those as a microcosm and say, look, like if we take these like two markets where there's very big fan cultures, and then start understanding what the behaviors are around that, and the women's consumer is already surprisingly valuable. Like she's spending a lot already, and if the way a lot of the reporting is looking at it isn't fully capturing her value, and so there's enormous amount of value there in that market. And what you've just got to do, what you've got to truly understand, is the things that delight her around the types of products she wants to buy. And again, our happiness advantage filter, we're helping them sort through the right type of innovation spaces, the right type of products that you think there's some real commonality with men, and there's some significant differences. I'll just tell you, I don't think this is an enormous trade secret. Bras suck. Bras suck.
Right. Bras suck and women hate them.
Yes. And sports bras, it's just like such an undeveloped market as sort of one example. And like the amount of misery inflicted upon women via bras, for example, is such a thing. And, like that's one area, the brand that can get that right, stands to gain a lot. And that is like when you're doing a lot of things within female innovation, it does sometimes just, and talking on a category level, it feels grossly undeveloped, doesn't it? We're like, how has this not moved more sooner? But I think our friends at Nike are sort of back on the front foot. They're doing what they do best, which is acting with conviction, trying to make big plays and looking ahead to the future. And they're a very, very exciting organization to work with.
Yeah, I would never bet against them. Setbacks are setbacks, but they'll get it right. It sounds like you all are doing some really fascinating work with them. And, you to do this kind of work, you're really embedding yourself pretty deeply in the culture of a company. And that, we started out talking about, adpocalypse and all the things the industry had been through. How are you getting that kind of access and getting that kind of buy-in? What parts of your process do you think are just key to that?
Well, it's such an interesting question. And it's like, honestly, I've wrestled with the process. I've wrestled with it because on one hand, I've, like you listen to the sort of ad agency types who are sort of saying, just get rid of process altogether. Don't, process gets in the way. And I never bought that. And I was always like, well, ad agencies have quite a lot of process, actually. Like everyone knows what a briefing is. They know what reviews are. Like, there's actually quite a lot of process. And on the other hand, you've got some of the modern consultants who are like, just follow my 5-step, journey like along. So the things that have been most influential to me on process actually is I've read things about how other types of professional services firms work. Like literally how do great law firms work, which I know might sound like a funny reference for creative industry, but like part of what they understand is you're paying for this very highly talented team that's got a view of how you work through a brief to a case or whatever. But also they put top tier talent, put a group on it, and they just intensely work with you and work through the problem. And there's still sort of no escaping that. Like when we start with Ollipop, like I went on a long hike with Ben, the founder of the company, like a half-day hike, and we shared, I don't know if that's a process, right? But like it was very valuable in forming a deep relationship. And I had to earn his respect, and there was no playbook for that. And actually, it's very challenging. He's a very, very bright guy. So he asks you questions you haven't thought about the answers to often, or asks you deep stuff. It was a very different, I was used to working with Heineken and Samsung in much more structured environments. And here I am just out in the woods with this dude who's, he doesn't think like a regimented, educated person who's asking all these crazy questions. And ultimately just had to, it's relationships, isn't it? So you just had to get his respect. And then we'd say, look, we want to get you into our brand vision process, and here's the steps, that we want to take. But it's just that bit that you can't quantify,
I think that's the most important bit. When you think about getting pushed downstream and all of a sudden you're just executing, you're a vendor and you're doing things off a brief that you don't even know who the hell wrote it. Getting time with decision makers and truly understanding their personal and professional challenges and their vision is the only way that I think really great work happens.
100%. And it's like, look at like Accenture and all that. Like, what they got relationships. They got a great brand and they get relationships at the highest. And that was, I mean, there's a whole series of things that has happened in the marketing industry. There's a storm of elements, but you have to go and talk to senior decision makers. You have to make things simple for them. Listen to them about, to your point, what do they want? What are they trying to achieve? How can your tools and techniques help them? And then you can get them into your process. And it's still, it's just enough process. It's a structure, but there's no trading for just really talented people who know how to work together. And
It's a very human thing, isn't it?
it antagonizes me, for example, how much the industry is trying to sell itself on AI right now. And don't get me wrong, like, we use AI, it's a very helpful intern, but it's not the selling price. I mean, like, you imagine the world's top law firm trying to sell themselves on AI. It's like the world's cheapest law firm will sell themselves on AI as a subscription platform. But the industry sometimes seems to deliberately deposition its value, where you're like, that's a tool, it's not the value,
Isn't that crazy? How many times the industry thinks a tactic or a tool is the actual value?
Yeah, it really seems to misunderstand those things, I think.
Yeah. And I think that's why you all are so successful, is that just talking to you, I can tell you're a highly empathic person. So, especially working the way you've been working, with your wife, going inside companies, having these real conversations, truly trying to understand, doing half-day hikes with founders. You have to listen. And that's what I think a lot of people in our industry have just forgotten, is that this is an industry that's supposed to be about empathy and listening. And if you're not going to really actually listen because you think you're a big deal, man, the road is just littered with those failures.
Oh, it's a service, because it's a service industry, isn't it? Which means listening is the most important skill. And I tell you, like all of us, I came out of university, thought I was really clever, and got hell kicked out of me in the first 5 years, which was exactly what I needed, because I wasn't good at listening to, like, I had my own ideas, and I didn't realize that was less important than what my clients were trying to achieve, really. And then figuring out ways in which you can map your ideas and connect to them, so that you're adding new stuff, but beginning with the premise of what are they up to. And God, I so resonate with what you're saying, because honestly, the lack of listening skills within the industry, sometimes you observe around, where people, I always joke, where I have a slightly controversial view, that I do think there is such a thing as a bad question. and a bad question to me is, for example, something that somebody's already answered if you were just listening. And how often does that happen in a meeting? So often, right?
Yeah. And it's like so easy to demonstrate that all you did was the minimum to be prepared, and you didn't really think, and you're not really there, because being genuine and showing up has a lot to do with it. I have a real point of view on hospitality. So my favorite book on brand is Unreasonable Hospitality by Will Guidara. And I grew up and, made my way into the industry and through university and all that by waiting in fine dining. And it changed who I was. I love the act of taking care of others. And when you think about when you're going into Ollipop and you're trying to help them grow and do these bold things, if you're not a nurturing, honest, compassionate person, you're probably going to fail, because then it's about you, not them.
100%. And like, I mean, it was a crazy journey we went on with Ollipop for 3 years. And if you weren't really always thinking, I'm not attached to my ideas too strongly. I've got views on what's going to work, but ultimately, like, things would quite dramatically change and stuff. And you've got to just be like, how can we help them at this moment? Like, what's the thing that, those high growth businesses, it's that it's a wild ride, so you've really just got to come into it with a lot of humility. And that was a big, like, in their culture, they would always just stress, like, we want humility, because they knew that like, just, you could have this super talented person with fixed ideas, and then it was like, yeah, but we need to figure out a solution to this unforeseen problem we've just seen, and you've just got to find a way. So yeah, we're all in hospitality, aren't we? I think it's great training.
Yeah, we really are. Like I I love and respect people in hospitality. And I think if there's one thing our entire industry could do, it'd be go for hospitality training. It's a differentiator.
It's so true, particularly like those high-end restaurants where they're really paying attention to everything that somebody's up to and just really understanding that is the job, you know? Yeah. The job is to understand your clients at a deep level, you know?
And care and show up and want them to, hospitality is about wanting other people to have a good experience. And that's incredibly important.
To go back to your point earlier about the sort of agency model, I mean, that was kind of part of it. I think the agencies had lost respect for the clients, and the clients had lost respect for the agencies. Like, there was a lot of those agency rooms where they were sort of very dismissive of their clients, really. And then whenever I got a peek on the client side, I was like, oh God, they really don't respect agencies right now. And, that's, that's never going to lead to good outcomes, is it?
It really isn't. Arrogance isn't super attractive. So, hey, let's talk a little bit about your company and why you named it Squint and what's behind that. Because I just find that really charming.
Well, so one, very glad that you find it charming because that is the intended effect. We wanted something, we felt that in the brand strategy and brand consulting space, there's quite a lot of serious names. And I don't want to name and shame here, but there's a lot of sort of like scientific or academic naming. And I'd come from an ad industry background, and I just thought, like, that's not how I want us to come across. I want us to come across in a way that we do brand strategy that is insightful, it's imaginative, it's fun to be around, all the things that a brand should be. And so that was sort of, first off, that was the brief. And then we got to Squint. So we were writing out, how naming goes. We were writing out tons and thousands of words. And Squint came from a pile which we were looking at. We want sort of interesting takes on vision, in which you're sort of, and what we loved about Squint was sort of this idea. One, you're looking ahead, you sort of, but it was sort of about taking like an unusual look at something, like a little funny look at something that might reveal something. And then honestly, we thought it's this short, fat word that looks right on the page, and sometimes it's a great brand strategy. It's like, it's a mix of all those things, right? Like there's a good logic to it, but we kind of knew the emotional effect that we wanted. And we get a lot of comments on the name.
I love it. It made me smile immediately. And to me, it just says that you all have a different kind of focus on things.
It's sort of a simple thing, but it like hopefully gets you to the right emotional effect, it's a little bit unusual.
I think it does. I think it's a great name. It's one of my favorites in the industry. What's the last brand that made you happy? Or what's a brand right now that's making you happy?
Oh, that's such a good question. What is a brand that's making me happy right now? Well, so I'm back in my homeland right now, back in the UK, and so I'm coming back to some of the, you can't help but come back to some of your very traditional food and drink stuff, right? So I've got PG Tips on the, and PG Tips is like an iconic British tea, and it's sort of a real comfort. To me, like British tea, like it's not the most exotic flavors, but so I'm enjoying that. And then I always think as well, don't you, that when you go back home, the things you miss the most are actually trashy snacks. It's not fun. It's not fine dining. So it's like, it's potato chips, like Britain loves, they've got aisles and aisles of potato chips. So we've got this thing called Monster Munch, which is like it's like they're potato chips in the sort of shapes of like monsters' feet and stuff. And it's a real child's snack thing, but I get a pack every time I'm back, and so it's that type of stuff. Honestly, I think I've still got a lot of those, that relationship with those types of brands, honestly.
I mean, that just speaks volumes, man. I think anyone listening to this can relate to that. We all have those things. I was talking to a group of students and they asked, like, I told them I thought everything is emotional. You buy emotionally, period. And they're like, well, what about bread? I'm like, well, why do you think there's 20 brands of it in your store? You have a relationship with one of them that's from your childhood. And I guarantee if you see it, you're going to feel all warm inside.
No, totally. And it can be tough to scale bread. Like Hovis has done a pretty good job in the UK of this, of making the sort of history and heritage of baking quite an emotional proposition. But I tell you, I buy bread now locally from a bakery, and I tell you what, in Amsterdam, the upend bakers market, like there isn't a better market in Amsterdam than selling fancy bread and fancy croissants, and it's very much about the experience that you walk into. They've got all the branding and stuff like totally down, and I'd pay 4x, and I don't care.
Well, it's memories and it's feeling. It's something, again, to just go back to the core of what you do. It makes you happy.
They've got amazing at that kind of hospitality bit that you were mentioning as well. Like you walk into your local bakery now, and there's someone there that knows me, and they ask me about my baby, and
I mean, that's really the key to small brands like that. What would you call this phase of your life right now? This chapter?
I'm 41. I've just had my first child about 10 weeks ago, and I'm 4 years into launching a business. So it's definitely like one way of looking at it is it's the responsibility era. You have a lot more responsibilities. And here's a different way of, I think, of looking at it. Like, and I love, I don't know if you know David Brooks, who writes extensively for New York Times, Atlantic, whatever. He wrote something a long time ago that was very influential, where he said, you shouldn't look at it as a midlife crisis. You should look at it as a midlife peak. And I loved that framing. And actually, I got some advice from my brother at the moment that I was thinking about launching a company. And he said, the way you've got to think about this is you're coming into your peak and what you want to do with it. So I think another way of looking at the demands and responsibilities where, it feels like there's not enough hours in the day, of this period, it's also your peak. It's like the thing where you're drawing on everything you've learned, the emotional maturity you've hopefully gained at least to some degree, and you're trying to get to peak performance, because you've got to be a great dad, you've got to be a great partner, you've got to lead a business, you've got to be a great manager. So there's all these different things, but that's there could be a positive way of looking at that, which is you trying to operate at your peak.
Yeah, I love that, man. I hope that'll resonate with a lot of people, because I think just the act of framing and reframing is probably one of the healthiest things you can do for yourself and others.
100%. I'd encourage everyone to read that David Brooks article, because I read it like 7 years ago or something. It's crazy, and it's just stayed with me. I thought he's so right.
I think that's so cool. I'm going to find that. Maybe we'll put that on your episode page too. We'll put some links.
I'll give that a plug, honestly, because I think, it's like, stop branding everything new that people do when they're 45 as a crisis,
Yeah. I mean, it's really powerful. I mean, again, that's just branding and experience, and it doesn't have to feel that way. We slowed down and realized we can reframe for ourselves. We'd be an awful lot happier. And, good for you, man. I think you are, exploring your peak and building on it. And it's fun to watch. I love your all's work. I think what you're doing is incredible. It's inspiring.
It's been a lot of fun.
Good. I'm glad. Keep going. So last question, and it's sort of like for young marketers out there. And then also I'm just curious, like at this moment, sort of starting to get into your peak, what would you go back and tell your younger self?
Oh, such a good question. Such a good question. There's honestly, and this, not to sound arrogant, there's not much I would change, because, in some ways, you just got to go and make your mistakes, haven't you? But I would say go a bit easier on yourself sometimes, like, I don't know, like a lot of people, I think there are times where I've just pushed myself to the point of dropping, and I think, funnily, having a kid has just made me realize you can work just as hard, but you don't have to put so much pressure on yourself, and just sometimes I think that I was guilty of in my 20s and 30s of just really the amount of pressure I put myself under, was not good sometimes. But maybe you just have to go through that, you have to get on the other side. I think we've all probably done that. I'm sure you've done that to yourself.
Yeah, I think it's a really common thing. I always wish that for younger people, that they could just have a little bit more self-compassion though, but then you realize like, well, I don't know if I did, and it taught me a lot. So, we're a product of all our experiences, good and bad. So, hey, man, thanks so much for being here today. This this conversation, it was just wonderful. I really enjoyed talking with you.
I really enjoyed it as well, Steve.
Want to hear more inspiring stories? Subscribe on your preferred podcast app so you don't miss an episode. And if you like what we're doing, please rate, review, and share. It's the best way to support us. Thank you for listening to Brand Story.